When you look at a map, you kind of think, okay, that's it. Continents here, oceans there, everything's settled. But some places on the map just don't play by the rules. They're like these geographic glitches shaped by bizarre history, weird economic quirks, and sometimes just pure human will. Today, we're diving into some of the world's strangest geographic oddities. So let's kick things off with a real head-scratcher. Picture a massive international seaport with huge cargo ships coming and going, but it's located thousands of miles from the nearest ocean. I mean, how is that even possible? The answer is going to completely change how you think about the American Midwest. See, that's the whole point, right? A place is never just a dot on a map. It's this messy, fascinating collision of geology, history, money, and ambition. And every now and then, that collision creates places that, logically, just shouldn't exist. But they do. First up, we're going to visit a geographic ghost. We're talking about a place that's haunted by a colossal empire that basically vanished from the map. Well, almost. Okay, imagine this. You're just off the coast of Canada, but suddenly your phone switches over to a European cell network. The cash machines spit out euros, and the police look like they're straight out of Paris. Well, welcome to Saint Pierre and Miquelon, the very last piece of France's huge North American empire, just kind of hiding in plain sight. I mean, just look at this timeline. It's completely chaotic. These tiny islands were like a geopolitical football, passed back and forth between Britain and France 9 different times. Can you imagine living there? Every time a big war started in Europe, you just see warships pop up on the horizon. Your whole town could be burned down, you could be deported, and then, years later, a treaty gets signed thousands of miles away, and you're allowed to go back and rebuild. It's this insane cycle of destruction and resilience, all driven by these distant empires. So why on earth did France cling so tightly to this one little spot? Well, it all goes back to 1763. France lost a massive war and had to make a choice: keep its huge Canadian territory or keep its super profitable sugar islands in the Caribbean. They chose the sugar. The famous philosopher Voltaire even mocked Canada, calling it nothing more than a few acres of snow. But they made one single demand. They absolutely needed a base for their fishing fleets. So while they gave away an entire continent, they stubbornly held on to this tiny, foggy fishing outpost. All right, so from a ghost of an old empire, let's jump to a modern marvel of logistics, right in the heart of the American Midwest. This is where we find that impossible seaport we talked about, and it all starts at a very, very special point on the map. This is genuinely wild. There's a spot in northern Minnesota called the Hill of Three Waters, and if you were to stand right there and pour a bucket of water on the ground, some of those drops could end up in the Atlantic Ocean. Others could flow north to the Arctic Ocean, and the rest could travel all the way south to the Gulf of Mexico. It's the hydrographic peak of the entire continent, the starting point for some truly epic journeys. And one of those epic journeys is for massive ocean-going ships. This number, 2,300 miles, that's how far a ship has to travel from the Atlantic through the St. Lawrence Seaway and all of the Great Lakes just to get to the Port of Duluth-Superior. It is, by far, the furthest inland freshwater seaport in all of North America. And don't let its location fool you for a second. The Port of Duluth is an absolute juggernaut. It's often the busiest port on the entire Great Lakes. This is the main exit ramp for the Heartland's incredible resources. The iron ore that builds our cities, the grain that feeds the world, all of it is shipped out from the very middle of a continent. It's incredible. But Minnesota's knack for creating impossible inland empires isn't just about shipping stuff out. It's also about bringing people in. The state is home to another kind of massive hub. And this number, 32 million, that's how many people visit the Mall of America every single year. To put that into perspective, that's like the entire population of Minnesota showing up 6 times a year. Yeah, and calling it a mall really doesn't do it justice. It's more like its own sovereign commercial zone. Get this, it has its own zip code. It's so big, it has a dedicated counterterrorism unit. It's less of a shopping center and more of a privately run city-state, a massive modern town square built entirely around commerce. So we've seen how history and sheer logistics can bend the rules of geography. But what happens when the connections we build, the things that are supposed to help, actually backfire? Let's look at 2 islands that are, paradoxically, trapped by the very links meant to save them. This comparison is just fascinating because it's 2 sides of the same coin. Over in Shikoku, Japan, they built this massive, incredible bridge to the mainland, hoping it would be a pipeline for prosperity. But instead, it acted like a giant straw, sucking talent, people, and money out of the island. And then you've got Puerto Rico. The connection isn't physical, it's legal. A 100-year-old shipping law called the Jones Act has basically created what a lot of people call an economic cage, trapping the island in a cycle of high prices and dependency. So, how did this trap even get built? Well, it was a systemic process, one step after another. First, you have the Jones Act, which says any goods shipped between U.S. ports have to be on super expensive U.S.-built and crewed ships. For an island that imports most of its food, that just makes everything more expensive. Then, the federal tax breaks that brought a lot of manufacturing jobs to the island were appealed, and those jobs just disappeared. When the debt crisis hit, a legal change specifically blocked Puerto Rico from declaring bankruptcy, a tool that any U.S. city can use. And the final piece was installing an unelected fiscal control board to manage the island's budget, often putting Wall Street investors ahead of local needs. It was just this tragic sequence of events that created a perfect economic storm. So we've got a French ghost town, an impossible inland port, and two islands caught in a trap. What do all these stories really tell us about the world we live in? They reveal that the world is just way, way stranger than we usually give it credit for. History leaves behind these fascinating relics, like St. Pierre. Human ingenuity and economic rules can create something as wild as a seaport in Minnesota. And a single law, written a century ago, can absolutely define the fate of millions of people on an island. What it all boils down to is this: a place is never just land and water. It's a story. And that really brings us to the final question, and this one's for you. These strange places aren't just trivia, they're a challenge. They challenge us to look at the map of our own world, our own city, our own neighborhood, and to ask, what invisible forces, what forgotten histories, and what strange rules made this place what it is today? The story is there, you just have to know how to look for it.